Jose's student, and after various adventures, was Jose's colleague here in Australia and Arizona. And after Syracuse, went on to Rutgers, and then now is the Waynflete Professor of Metaphysics and the Waynflete Professor of Metaphysical Philosophy at Magdalen College, Oxford University. Today he's going to talk to us on semantic plasticity.
Well, it's true that I was both Jose's colleague and his student, but my memories are very much as his student, and indeed my self-conception is very much as his student. He made an enormous impression on me, and that was no accident because he made an enormous impression on most of his students. I suppose there are at least two reasons for that. One reason, and I think I came to discover this is very rare, is the excitement and passion that Jose had and spread as far as philosophy goes. Jose really got us thinking of the latest ideas and moves as potentially important events in the history of human understanding of the world, and for that reason worthy of immense excitement and passion. And that's something that has stayed with many of us. The other reason, and again it's a very rare gift, is that Jose was able to communicate the most recent ideas and argumentative moves in the core areas of philosophy in a way that was so memorable and clear and vivid that you just couldn't forget them. They just stayed with you. You felt like you now forever understood most of the main ideas and argumentative moves of the day, and that felt to us like it gave us an intellectual foundation that stayed with us and helped us along in our careers, and was an intellectual foundation that very few philosophers were able to give us. I mean, besides that, of course, he had a whole wealth of one-of-a-kind ideas and communicated those ideas with a one-of-a-kind style that none of us could try to emulate. So I just wanted to say, on behalf of all of the students that have worked with you, how grateful we are for what you've given to us. What Jose wanted me to do today was give a paper. He wasn't interested in me doing anything else, so and he wanted me to give a paper sort of that's drawn from my most recent work. What I've mainly been working on actually is a book in philosophy of language with a guy called David Manley on reference and singular thought, but I couldn't really distill a 40-minute talk out of that. And I have some work on conditionals and on naturalness with Key and Dorr that again, it was hard to get a 40-minute talk out of. So I decided to just, I mean, it's a little bit random, but to give a talk essentially on metasemantics that's again drawn from a paper that I recently wrote and haven't published yet with my colleague at Oxford, Key and Dorr. The title's Semantic Plasticity. So I'm going to spend the next 35 or 40 minutes just talking through that, for better or worse. Hope that's okay. Most of us think of the semantic facts construed broadly as facts about the semantical values of expressions and facts about what we think and say. We think of those facts as somehow supervening on a microphysical ground floor. But let me juxtapose, and all this is going to be rough and ready, and I haven't got time to be very precise, and maybe I haven't got the ability to be very precise, but let me juxtapose in a rough and ready way two sorts of ways of thinking about how the semantical facts relate to the metaphysical ground floor. One way is sort of like this. As you vary the microphysical facts smoothly across time and or across worlds, the semantical facts themselves vary smoothly across time and or across worlds. And the second way of thinking is that, no, it's not like that at all. As you vary the microphysical facts smoothly, the semantical facts vary in a sort of a jerky way, so that the semantical facts, as it were, looked at temporally or modally, are divided into cells of stasis, and then there are jumps. So, you know, just to focus our mind on the temporal case, for example, I mean, imagine a community that uses a word, say, salad, and at the end point they use salad like maybe we use it to apply to things with a preponderance of green leaves, and let's not worry about the other criteria. And at the beginning, use it to apply to things to various, they comfortably apply it to various leaf-free concoctions, and the use sort of varies smoothly, changes smoothly between that time and now, so that between any two times, there's scarcely any difference between dispositions and actual usage between those times. And we can replicate the same scenario modally as well, of course. The view that I'll call plasticity says that as the underlying facts are varying smoothly across time, the semantical facts are varying smoothly across time too. So there's slight variation always happening as time goes by. And the view that I'll call patchwork says that, well, what's going on is that there are periods of stasis where there's semantic homogeneity, and then a jump, and then stasis, and then a jump. They're the two views that I want to juxtapose. And I'd like to talk about ways of putting pressure on those views and resources that those views have for responding to those pressures. And the cumulative impression I want to give you is how difficult it is, at least when one takes a certain perspective, of reconciling our ordinary semantic practices with a plausible meta-semantics about how the underlying ground floor fixes the semantical facts. So the two pictures, patchwork and plasticity. And I want to say at the outset, you could mix and match. You know, one could take the patchwork approach to the temporal case and the plasticity approach to the modal case. I don't want to say there's any logical force march from the modal to the temporal or in the other direction. But I do want to present both cases as ones worth thinking about. And then there are also spatial versions. I mean, you could imagine a bunch of villages settled along a river, and the dispositions of each of pairs of proximate villages are extremely similar, so they just sort of talk fluidly to one another. And at one end, the villagers at one end are disposed to use the word salad like we do, and the villagers at the other end correspond to the population that I described in the temporal version of the case, and then the villages are pairwise, almost exactly the same in their dispositions. And they're also, of course, disposed to translate each other homophonically. So you can do it spatially too, but I'm not going to talk about the spatial case for now. Okay, so we've got the topic down. Let's start with plasticity. I want to start with an obvious challenge and then talk about three sorts of moves for responding to the challenge. Make it four, depending on how. And then I'll talk about patchwork, talk about three kinds of challenges to patchwork, and then various kinds of maneuvers available for responding to those challenges. And I'll talk about five. Given time constraints, I'm not going to talk about anything for very long. Has someone got a timepiece? Because I don't know what's going on.
Yes. Someone went down.
When should I stop? I should stop at about, like, if I stop at 5 to...
3, 3.
Yeah, okay, I won't go past. So the most salient challenge to plasticity is that it appears to make a lot of our semantical and attitudinal reports come out false. That's the main threat, is it appears to make our semantical and attitudinal reports come out false. So suppose yesterday Sally uttered the words, "salad is delicious." According to plasticity, Sally didn't mean that salad was delicious by the word salad was delicious. And so it appears that if I say, yesterday Sally said that salad was delicious, I said something false. Similarly, plasticity appears to predict that, as it were, at the close worlds, Sally says something very similar, means something very similar to salad by salad, but doesn't mean salad by salad, means salad star, which is, you know, a property somewhat similar in intention to, but slightly different in intention to salad. And so that threatens us with the result that it's false to say things like, well, if I'd have taken Sally to Pastabilities, she would have asked for salad. Because it looks like, well, actually, she wouldn't have asked for salad, she would have asked for salad star. So that's the kind of threat that you get to plasticity. And when faced with these kinds of threats, there are a few different kinds of philosophical temperaments. There are the kind of philosophers who say, all right, well, it's false, but it's a harmless falsehood. It's quasi-true. You know, they cook up some near to true concept and say it's not such a big deal that all these things are false. They're harmless falsehoods. We believe them. We believe these falsehoods. So it's not the sort of thing where we say something true but we don't false but we don't believe it. It looks like we're believing these things. So the person who has this approach will say, yeah, we say it, we believe it, it's false, but it's harmless. And if you're that kind of philosopher, you're not going to get too gripped by the puzzle that I'm interested in. What I'm really interested in is what resources are available to philosophers that aren't very satisfied with that kind of response, the harmless falsehood kind of response. So I'm going to just go through some of the moves available. I mean, there might be other moves. I'm going to mention a few. Three. I'm going to mention. First, I'll just give them names in case anyone wants to refer to them. I'll call it loading. And it's a response that's really designed for the counterfactual version of the worry. It's well known, I suppose, that when we utter counterfactuals, we often, as it were, hold fixed a bunch of facts. When I say, if I said, if I'd have forgotten to have breakfast this morning, I hold fixed the history up to that time, the macrophysical history at least up to that time, or almost up to that time. And that's what common wisdom goes, makes it true that if I'd have, that is relevant to what makes it true that if I'd have forgotten to have breakfast this morning, that would have been the first time in 7 days that I'd have done so. And the response that I'm calling loading says, what makes the puzzle go away in the counterfactual case is that we hold fixed the semantical facts. We just hold them fixed by hand, as it were. So just like we can hold fixed the history, we can hold fixed the relevant semantical facts. We can hold fixed the fact that our words have the English meanings that we do. And as it were then, we only look at the closest worlds where the facts that we're holding fixed also hold. And so, insofar as we hold fixed that salad means salad, then of course, insofar as Sally would have uttered the words, I want salad, if she'd have gone to past abilities, she would have, holding fixed that salad means salad, she would have asked for salad. So that's the essence of the first response. A couple of things I just want to throw out about that response. First thing, of course, it's not very well designed to say very much about the temporal case. It doesn't seem that there's a very comfortable analog to the loading move in the temporal version of the puzzle. And the second thing that I think is slightly intriguing is that if you play this card a lot, then you risk having very strange counterfactual dependencies crop up. I'll just give you a flavor of this. So suppose Ted is very liberal with his use of the word thin. So he's disposed to apply the word thin to people that, a lot of people would hold back. He's liberal with his application of thin. And let's suppose he's a contributor, he's a little contributor to the overall meaning of thin, such that, as it were, if you took him away, then there'd have to be quite a lot of compensating adjustments for the word thin to mean exactly the same. Suppose there's an assassin who's thinking about shooting Ted, and we're considering the counterfactual if the assassin had tried to have shot Ted. Well, suppose it's a very good assassin. It'd be natural to think that it's true that if the assassin had tried to shoot Ted, the assassin would probably have succeeded. But if we hold fixed the semantical facts, then we can only look at worlds where the semantical facts are exactly the same. Now, if you remove Ted from the equation, that puts quite a bit of pressure on thin to mean a little bit different. So if we hold fixed the semantical facts, then to cut a long story short, we have a risk of generating very strange counterfactual dependencies like, oh, thanks to the fact that we hold fixed the semantical facts, if, and because he's quite a liberal, he's very unusually liberal in his use of thin, if Zach had tried to shoot Ted, he would probably have missed. So this just brings out how odd things can get if you just insert by hand certain semantical things, hold them fixed and let the chips fall where they may. They might fall in a way that institutes very surprising counterfactual dependencies. I don't mean either of those considerations to be utterly damning, but they at least give us incentive to look elsewhere. Second response. Which one should I do next? Parasitism. Let's take the word local. It's wrong to think the word local is a context-dependent term with quite a bit of flexibility. And it's wrong to think that the meaning of local is mechanically anchored by the locale of the utterer. I mean, if I say Jose's going to a local bar, I could mean that he's going to a bar local to where I am. But in other contexts, I might mean he's going to a bar local to where he is. There's, as it were, a use of the word local where the meaning is somehow parasitic on, or the contribution to truth conditions is parasitic on the person I'm talking about rather than my own particular locale. And you might think that appealing to context dependence in general and a kind of parasitism in particular, one can caress some of the data that we're interested in, even having bought into a roughly plasticity-friendly picture of the metasemantics. So the picture I have is this, is that in the context where you say, yesterday Sally said that salad was delicious, in that setting, the word salad, as it were, just picks up on the meaning that Sally had yesterday, as opposed to being endowed with the meaning that it more would more naturally or more standardly have in the current setting. That's the general sort of idea, and similarly for the counterfactual case, you're a parasite. The meaning of salad in the counterfactual setting is parasitic on what it would have meant in the relevant counterfactual scenario. The main thing, and again I can't run through all the ins and outs, the main thing I want to say about these kinds of appeals to context dependence is that they would tend to predict a kind of structural ambiguity where there's two readings available. I mean, think about the case of local. There is, if I'm talking about Jose in Syracuse and I'm in Oxford and I say Jose is going to a local bar, there is a reading, maybe it's not the preferred reading, but it's fairly readily available, a reading according to which the thing is false, even if there is available a reading according to which it's true. If there is a parasite-driven reading of yesterday Sally said that salad was delicious that makes it true, you'd think that there would also be a reading that's a non-parasitic reading, as it were, where the sentence comes out false. And we don't, unlike the case of local, we don't hear any of the relevant kinds of ambiguities. Again, I don't mean to suggest that's a damning worry, but it is a worry that sort of casts a little bit of doubt on the strength of the analogy with terms like local. Doesn't quite seem to feel like the same phenomenon. Third move that I want to talk about in connection to plasticity is a view that I'll call multiplicity. People often proceed as if when we, as it were, utter a declarative sentence, we thereby assert a single proposition. But there's a minority that think, no, the relationship between uttering a sentence and asserting propositions is one-many. When you utter a declarative sentence, you thereby assert many propositions. There's a plurality of propositions such that you assert each of them. And similarly, when you sincerely accept a declarative sentence, there are many beliefs that you thereby, many beliefs that you thereby come to have, many propositions that you thereby come to stand in the belief relation to. So one strategy at least worth exploring is whether any of the bad results of plasticity could be softened by throwing in various doses of multiplicity. So it's actually quite tricky to get any of these models to sit completely comfortably. Let me describe one model and at least describe to you its shortcomings. I'm going to leave it at that and then just move on. The model goes like this. It was a model suggested to us by Tim Williamson at some point in the bar, so we thought about it some. The model is one where a sentence out of context, semantically, it has as its semantic value one proposition. But as it were, there are a whole bunch of candidates. We can think of this in a sort of supervaluationist way, if you want. Such that while you semantically express one proposition, you assert each and every one of the candidates, each and every of the propositions that are, as it were, close enough, and this is all very vague, I know, to the proposition semantically expressed. So that's the picture. You assert a ton of propositions, and so from one time to another, there'll be a whole cloud of propositions that you assert, and there'll be massive overlap between the cloud of propositions that you assert at one time and the cloud of propositions that you assert at a slightly later time. And so there will be smooth variation, but it won't be that there's no overlap. It will be, there's a smooth variation from clouds to clouds with massive overlap between any two proximate times, and you can reproduce this in the modal setting. So that's the essence of multiplicity played out in a particular way. Let me just alert you to one shortcoming of this. So take the assertion, yesterday Sally said that salad was delicious. Well, on the picture in question, salad is delicious now expresses one cloud. Yesterday it expressed a slightly different but overlapping cloud. And doing it in a natural compositional way, if I say, yesterday Sally asserted that salad was delicious, then for each member of my cloud, I'm asserting that yesterday Sally asserted it. Now, by hypothesis, there are some elements of my cloud that aren't elements of Sally's cloud. So when we calculate things through in that way, I will be asserting very many truths when I say, yesterday Sally asserted that salad was delicious. But there will be some falsehoods that I'll assert by that sentence. Namely, the falsehoods corresponding to values, as it were, asymptotic values of salad is delicious that are members of my cloud but aren't members of hers. Because I'll be saying that yesterday she asserted that, and she didn't, by hypothesis. So that's, as it were, one very mechanical and straightforward way to implement the multiplicity approach. But it doesn't seem to leave us feeling altogether comfortable, because it has us thinking that whenever we make these cross-temporal reports, we may be asserting some truths, but we are asserting one or more falsehoods, which doesn't seem to leave us in a situation of complete comfort. Okay, I'm just giving you a menu, and you can muck around as you will. That's my, I've given you a fourfold menu for plasticity. Harmless truth, loading counterfactuals, multiplicity, and parasitism. I mean, you can come up with some others, but that's the menu that I have to offer for friends of plasticity. Let's switch now to patchwork. If you think about it, I suppose that there are three kinds of worries that arise in connection with patchwork. One epistemic and two metaphysical. The epistemic worry is this. I mean, let's take the temporal case, and suppose we're in that temporal chain, as it were. We can't, of course, say that small differences never make a difference, because, small differences add up to big differences. So at sometimes small differences, tiny differences, do induce a semantic shift, according to patchwork. And then the epistemic worry is, supposing that we're talking about Sally yesterday, how do we know that the small difference that divides us from Sally yesterday is or isn't one of those small differences that marks semantic shift? So so the worry is patchwork doesn't allow us to know. It allows for certain truths when it comes to very myriad cross-temporal semantical claims, but it doesn't allow us to know that they're true. And so it doesn't really get to the heart of what's bothering us. So that's the epistemic worry. Metaphysical worry one. It seems, I'm not saying that these are ultimately correct or unanswerable, they're just prima facie worries. It seems fundamentally unintelligible that why the shifts should occur where they do. If the underlying physical facts are varying smoothly, it seems that there's no intellectually satisfying story that could be told as to why they're shifting at that time rather than another time. Why are the stasis cells where they are and the jumps where they are? So there's a kind of arbitrariness, unsatisfying arbitrariness in the semantics, having to do with where the boundaries lie. So that's arbitrariness worry one. And there's another kind of arbitrariness worry. I mean, let's let's take, I mean, this is a bit rough and ready, let's take physical phase space or something, and let's suppose we have the picture for some continuum. You know, lots of properties belong to continuous families. Let's take a continuous family, and let's have the picture that each of them is associated with a non-zero measure cell. It then starts to feel that, well, there isn't room for them all to get their due. There's going to be tons of members of that continuous family that don't get a look in at all in phase space. I mean, one's got to write various things down to make this worry precise. But the worry is that if every member of the continuous family occupies a non-zero measure region, then at least on the assumption that at no world in a finite, and you know, this is where it gets tricky, at no world are infinitely many members of the family expressed, it looks like there isn't room in phase space to express every member of the family. And then that starts to get you to think, wow, some members of this family are privileged. They get to be expressed at various possible worlds, nomologically possible worlds, and others aren't. And you might think, well, that's a kind of privileging of some members of the family over others in a setting where it looks for all the world that metaphysically they're on a par and have an equal right to be expressed. So that's a different kind of metaphysical worry. It's a worry that some properties will be privileged or are being haloed vis-a-vis others in the modal case when somehow our pre-theoretic sense is that there shouldn't be any such privileging going on. So that's a second kind of arbitrariness worry. And all of this needs to be tightened up. I do realize that. Okay, so there are 3 worries, and here are 5 solutions addressed to some or other of the worries. As against the epistemic worry, some will appeal to safety. In fact, I came across a paper by Stephen Kearns and Magdalen that sort of make this move in a fairly similar setting. So the idea is, and it's a very familiar move in contemporary epistemology, so long as we're lucky enough to be more or less in the middle of a cell, then we're lucky, basically, we're lucky enough to know. As the main move, as Jose kept reinforcing in contemporary epistemology, is, well, you know, so long as you're lucky. You know? And the idea is, so long as you're lucky enough to be in the middle of a cell, you're lucky enough to know because you're safe, because there's no close situation where you mean something different or something like that. So that's the kind of safety theoretic move that some will combine with patchwork to fend off the epistemic worry. I do want to say, I want to just make 2 quick points in connection to that. And one point is that it has a very, very optimistic construal of closeness. I mean, suppose that in fact, in 28 years' time, Martians are going to invade the Earth. And suppose Ted says now, Martians aren't going to invade the Earth next year. I mean, it seems very optimistic to say, oh, well, Ted, in that scenario, Ted knows that the Martians aren't going to invade next year because, you know, the invasion was 28 years away and, you know, he's pretty safe right now because there's no close situation where they invade. That seems to be sort of a very misguided application of safety, and there's a worry that there's a similarly misguided application of safety here. Another thing that I want to say is that, you know, if you have the patchwork view, it's not very likely, or it doesn't seem very plausible that your words are going to change, in that the cells for salad are going to line up with the cells for gravy, are going to line up with the cells for person or whatever. I mean, the cells are going to, you know, overlap in all sorts of ways, such that if you, as a general practice, apply homophonic methods, then at pretty much any time, with respect to some words, you're going to be on the close to the edge of a cell, and they're going to be messing up. So when you look at it that way, when you remind yourself that the cells aren't lining up, you're going to end up seeing that homophonic, holding fixed all the other aspects of the view, homophonic reporting practices have an extremely spotty track record. There are, as it were, close situations where something like that method delivers false results. And that reinforces, in my mind, the hazards of thinking that safety, appeals to safety, will, as it were, successfully rebuff the epistemic worry. Okay. Response 2. We'll see. It's a prelude to response 3, really. When people hear these worries, they often, they've read some Davidson or something, and they have some vague sense that if they can appeal to the principle of charity or humanity or something, then that will make these problems go away. And I think what they're thinking was, well, it's a constitutive principle, perhaps, of the nature of meaning or something, that people that are not too dissimilar to us mean the same thing by us, or something like that. But if they only mean something slight, they're only a little bit different from us, then they're going to mean exactly the same thing by us. Of course, it's got to be restricted. I mean, if you take the word actually, if you apply that modally, you don't want, people that are modally just a bit different to mean exactly the same thing as us by actually. So it's far too crude anyway, the naive application of charity, but you get the feel for the view. The idea is that thanks to charity or humanity or something like that, some principle to the effect that people close to us mean the same thing by us, we can be secure in our reporting practices. Now, I think the thing to see is, if you just go with that, it really pushes the problem back in that the key epistemic worry then is how we know that the relevant principle of humanity is true. Because at least assuming, when you look at the cases that I'm interested in, everything seems to come unraveled if you assume that all the people in the chain are expressing truths by the counterpart of the sentence. That's the principle of charity. So suppose, take the temporal case. Suppose everyone in the chain is a philosopher who's read their Davidson and is confidently uttering the sentence, everyone like me, means everyone at close situations means the same. Something like that. By the word salad. I suppose they say that. Everyone, they apply the principle of humanity, say everyone at close situations means the same by the word salad. Well, suppose I'm here looking at the guy one step back. By one application of the principle of charity, I can say, oh, well, he meant that everyone means, he meant means by means, and he meant the word salad by salad, and he meant salad by salad. So he meant that, he meant what I mean by the principle of humanity as applied to salad. And supposing that it's true, then what that means is that not only does he mean what I mean by salad, but he's correctly thinking that the people next to him mean the same as him by salad. Well, if I mean what he means by salad, and the people next to him mean what he means by salad, then I mean what they mean by salad. Well, then the people 2 steps back utter, and then we can keep applying that reasoning, and assuming everyone's speaking the truth, and then assuming everyone's uttering something that looks like the principle of humanity, then repeated applications of the principle of humanity to that utterance, coupled with the assumption that that utterance is true, will lead us to the absurd conclusion that the people at the beginning of the chain mean exactly what we do by the word salad. So it doesn't seem to me to be a stable response at all to just appeal to the principle of humanity / charity. What is sort of stable satisfying is to go for plasticity, is to go for patchwork with exceptions. So we know patchwork can't apply across the board. Modally doesn't seem to be the right view for the word actually. Plasticity seems right for actually, not patchwork. And one view to try on for size is that while patchwork is right for salad, plasticity is right for the word means. And the picture, I'll just give you the picture. The picture is that, you know, the word means in our mouth picks out a relation meaning that induces a cell structure that has us at the middle of cells. And at nearby worlds, yeah, people mean salad by salad, of course, thanks to the cell structure induced by means. But as far as the word means goes, they mean a slightly different relation by means, because we've got plasticity for means. They're picking out a relation that induces a slightly different cell structure that has them in the middle. So then when they say people near us mean the same thing by us, they're saying people near us mean star the same thing by us, and they're exactly right. And then the people next to them, thanks to the plasticity of means, express a relation with a slightly different cell structure again that has that in the middle. You get the picture? That's the picture. We've got patchwork for salad and plasticity for means. If you go for that, then you'll save the reporting practices of salad reports. You'll save our salad reports without thinking that we're in a special epistemic position with regard to the sentence that we use to express the principle of charity, because in effect, thanks to the plasticity of the word means, all our friends will be expressing a truth, albeit a slightly different truth, by the counterpart utterance in their mouth. So I think that's an interesting package. It has its limitations. What are its limitations? Basically, the key limitation is that when it comes to reports involving semantical vocabulary itself, the original worry that I rose for salad will arise in that case. So suppose they mean something different by means, then if I say, yesterday Adam said that salad means salad, well, that will be false because he wouldn't have meant meaning by means, he'd have meant mean star by means. So you'll save a whole bunch of stuff, but the key move that stabilizes things for this basically patchwork with exceptions is a move that still makes certain kinds of cross-temporal and or modal reports come out false. Fourth kind of toy to play with is vagueness. I've just got 2 toys left and then I'll stop. Vagueness. When philosophers hear arbitrariness concerns, it's often quite natural to try and emphasize certain variants of the view that add in a dose of vagueness. So suppose you hear Paul Ben-Asaraf's view that numbers are sets, and then you're confronted with the worry, well, the view that Paul Ben-Asaraf attacked them. Suppose you hear the view that numbers are sets, and then you're confronted with the worry, the Ben-Asaraf worry, that it seems arbitrary to say that the numbers are one particular series of sets rather than another particular series of sets. In response to that, a lot of philosophers find it natural to try and emphasize a view that says that definitely numbers are sets, but there's no set such that it's definitely the number 3. And there are models that make those views come out as prima facie coherent. Similarly, in response to the 2 kinds of arbitrariness worries that I provided you with, it's natural to try and emphasize the view that, well, definitely there's a cell structure, but there's no particular pair of times or modal line such that that definitely marks a rift between one cell and another. So that's sort of a recipe for replying to one kind of worry, and then similarly in connection to the other kind of worry that you're making certain elements of continuous families haloed in a way that is a bit uncomfortable, you could triemphasize the view that says definitely some members of that family are expressed in phase space and others not, though there's no member of that family such that definitely it's expressed at some non-zero region of phase space or something. So similarly, you can throw in a dose of vagueness to try and allay the second kind of arbitrariness worry. What I want to say in connection with that, I mean, there are lots of things to say about this move, but at least one obvious thing to say is it doesn't seem to address the basic worry about reporting practices. I mean, if it doesn't secure the truth of, it doesn't seem to secure the truth of, yesterday, Sally said that salad was delicious because, you know, supposing it's vague where the boundaries are, then it seems indefinite whether Sally meant the same yesterday as me today, and if it's vague whether she meant yesterday what I mean today, then it seems to be indefinite whether yesterday she said that salad was delicious. And in general, you know, if you're in this swing of this sort of vagueness ideology, once you recognize that something's indefinite, you shouldn't be saying it. If I see that it's indefinite whether, you know, Tim Williamson's thin, then I shouldn't be asserting that Tim Williamson's thin. By analogy, if I embrace a package that says it's indefinite, whether yesterday Sally said that salad was delicious, that should induce me to desist from asserting that yesterday Sally said that salad was delicious. So one thing that you can try to do to patch up this view, I mean, I gave you a tweak on charity to try and give it a bit more life. One thing that you can do to give this a bit more life, that I think lands you in a similar position to the last tweak in a certain way, is to have what I call vagueness plus local precisification. So some people have a view according to which terms are vague, but when you make judgments, that precisifies the term in a certain way. So maybe it's vague where the borderline between red and orange are, but some shifting sands people say, nevertheless, in a setting where I judge something's red and something else is saliently exactly like it, then in that setting the word red gets precisified in such a way that it's no longer an acceptable precisification of the word red, that that particular pair marks a boundary between red and orange. So similarly, you can combine vagueness with local resolution in such a way that the very practice of making reports precisifies terms in such a way that the reports in effect come out definitely true, and the word meaning gets partially precisified in a way that it's no longer vague in that context whether the particular you and the reportee are either side of a semantical cell. To cut a long story short, what makes this move leads you to a rather similar position to the one that combines patchwork for salad with plasticity for means, is that when you think that view through, what it means is that when we're in slightly different settings, as it were, we're reporting on slightly different people, the word means is itself getting resolved in slightly different ways. The word means is getting slightly different precisifications. But what that means is that definitely in those two settings, the word means something slightly different. because, as it were, the range of precisifications for the word means in a setting where there's certain salient similarities is going to be slightly different to the acceptable precisifications of the word means in a setting where there's another range of salient similarities. The result will be that the meaning of means in those two settings appears to be definitely different. And then the result that you risk having is that you save the reporting practices with regard to the word salad at the cost of making the meaning of means so plastic that pretty much any use of means will again come out indeterminate or false. Okay, I've run out of time. I hope that was vaguely fun. So thank you.